Hello and welcome to Keeping It Young podcast, conversations about marriage, family, and ministry life. I'm Dave.
And I'm Bethany.
We're the Youngs. Bethany and I are sure glad you've joined us today. We've just been amazed at the response that we've received through this podcast. And
it's been
I think
overwhelming.
Just recently, we were well over 16,000 downloads and just really amazed at that. We've gotten a lot of emails and messages and even a text and a call here and there. And if you'd like to go to our website, keepingityoungpodcast.com, you can send us a voicemail from there, a voice message, I guess is the correct way to say it. On the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, you'll see a little microphone. You can click on that. It'll open it up, and you can record us a message. We'd love to hear from you. And if we can do something for you or help you in any way at all, we'd certainly be happy and honored to do that as well.
Absolutely.
We've been talking a lot about marriage. That's been kind of the focus of these past,
maybe 8 weeks, 7 weeks?
At least 7 or 8 weeks, I suppose.
Yes.
And we've decided to change gears a little bit. Since we're talking, we've titled our podcast, Conversations About Marriage, Family, and Ministry Life. We thought we'd talk some about family, and we're going to do several parts to this, and I guess we'd title it all across the top, maybe Family Success. And I suppose anybody listening would want to have a successful family. As you know, we have 5, and we've covered all the bases. Abby and Josh are married. They don't have children yet, but you can pray with us about that. And we're ready. We're waiting. And then Matthew's in college and engaged.
Yes.
He plans to be married next summer, as far as we know. We have a senior in high school and a
7th grader.
A 7th grader. These are exciting days.
Very
Family
exciting.
is awesome. Our pastor says it like this. Our pastor says, "Ain't no hood like parenthood."
It's true. It
And,
can be
that's
scary and exciting all at the same time.
One of his favorite sayings. He says that one quite often. So we thought today we would do part 1 of this series and talk to you about the single most important word in raising children. Single most important word. We've asked that question in conferences quite frequently.
Right.
And I was trying to think about all the answers that we get. We usually get God.
Yes.
It's hard to argue with that one.
That's true. That's true.
It's hard to
Prayer.
argue.
People say prayer.
Prayer's a big one, and you probably should be really good at that if you're going to have children. Your prayer life should work. Somebody I know has said love. We hear that one a lot. Love.
That's very important.
And I've along the way, we've heard a few people say spanking. You got to spank them real good.
We know where they are with their children.
That's a challenging word for our culture, and certainly an important word even for raising children. And then someone would say the Bible. And these are obviously not wrong answers.
No,
right?
no. What about winning your children to the Lord? Soul winning,
that's
salvation.
True. Yeah, we've heard a ton. Most important words in raising children. So the word we've chosen, the word that we think is the most important word, though, is the word training. And that's a key word, an important word. And my goodness, that word sums up a whole lot.
It does.
It takes God to help us train our children. It takes a lot of prayer.
Right.
It takes winning them to Christ, so there's the salvation.
Right.
Might even take some good old-fashioned spankings. Our parents believed in that. Both of our parents did. It's kind of a tricky word today.
It is.
But I know both of our parents believed that, and it seems like the culture did pretty much across the board until recent years.
Yes.
And that was considered an essential part. They did wrong. You spank them. You help them. And so we'll talk about that eventually in these next few weeks and series. But training is the key word. So here's some verses, and let's just go through some verses, kind of lay the foundation for today. So read for us Ephesians 6:4.
Ephesians 6:4 says, "And ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord."
Now, that's a great verse that every parent ought to know. And it's written especially to fathers, though I did look that word up. And one of the commentators said that the word father can also be the word parent, but it is specific. If you're going to say father, you say that one, though sometimes it is used in the sense in some writings as parents. And so obviously it would include both of us, but dads, there's no doubt about it that God very specifically here is holding, as men, he holds us responsible for the training of our children. And I was thinking about that today, because one of the things we know about our culture is that there are a lot of absentee fathers.
Yes.
And maybe the reason the enemy and the culture on the spiritual side of things, maybe the reason there are so many absentee fathers is because our enemy knows that if he can destroy the father,
yes,
he certainly can undermine the training of the children.
Absolutely.
That's not to discourage a single mom.
No.
Because one of the great things you'll find in the Bible is that God covers all the bases. I often think about Timothy, who came to know Christ and was mightily used of God alongside of the Apostle Paul in the first century.
Right.
But his grandmother Lois got saved, and his mother Eunice got saved, and they trained Timothy, and he got saved.
Right,
As
and
far
they
as we
didn't
know.
really mention his father much.
And his father's mentioned in Acts, but it appears that he's an unbeliever.
Right.
So that's not to discourage you, but it is to say that, dads, you men that are listening, this is an important topic for you. You remember, one of the things the Bible tells, and we've learned this in recent weeks, is in Ephesians 5, the husband is the head of the wife in Ephesians 5, and probably the emphasis there is the head of the home. And to that end, God's holding us as men responsible. So really three phrases.
Well, and I was just thinking, looking at these three phrases, bring them up and nurture and admonition, you think a lot of the mom doing that instead of the dad.
Sure. Yeah, moms are the ones that, at least in the old days especially, she stayed home with them. And a lot of times dad's silent while mom's fussing at the kids or getting onto the kids.
Yes.
And but the three phrases he gives here that we ought to think about in the idea of training, he says, bring them up. We are to bring up our children. That phrase has the idea we're to cherish them. In Ephesians 5, it's the same word that says, no man ever yet hates his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes, and for that we care about ourselves.
Right, so it's the care and concern.
The same way that I care about myself and take care of myself. I don't want anything to hurt me.
Right.
I'm to be that concerned about my children. So we're to rear them to maturity. The idea is to bring them up to maturity. And so your kid may be 11. Well, you're not done training because they're not ready for maturity yet.
A lot of cherishing and nourishing is still to go.
And really, sometimes 18 and 19 is finishing up our part of helping them to get to maturity.
Right.
And our older two, they're there. They have their own house, their own car, their own jobs, their own finances, their own spouse.
Right.
But even our Matthew, who's in Bible college, we're helping him towards final issues of maturity. Right. Thinking through the job he'll get next summer and where he'll live and what it will mean to be married, all those kind of things. So bring them up. If you got little ones, maybe you're holding an infant as you're listening to this. You've got a lot of training yet to do. Right. And I know you care about that baby, but you've got to train that baby. The phrase rear up is the old English idea of to train them to maturity. Got a long ways to go before that baby's done. And then
but it does go fast.
It does go fast. And then, unless you're in it, in the middle of it, you're thinking, go fast, nothing. I haven't slept in 6 weeks.
The thick of the days are slow, but
it does fly.
The days as a whole fly, yes. So
then the other word is nurture. Bring them up in the nurture. That's education or training, correction, instruction. It's the word chastening. So part of our bringing up our children is to educate them and train them. And that involves everything from correcting them, instructing them, chastening them, reproving them, rebuking them. That's all sewn up in the word nurture. Okay. The last word is admonition. It means the idea of the word is to call attention to. Probably that's the one that has the most vocab to it. It's our vocal training, calling attention to, rebuking, warning. It's when we set our kids down. In our family, we call it a family meeting. Let's have a family meeting. My dad called it a business meeting. Let's have a business meeting. And in the business meetings in those days, he made all the motions, and they carried. Right. It's a family meeting. So and sometimes it's not a family meeting. It's as you're walking through life. Deuteronomy says that we teach our kids as we sit in the house, walk through life, go to bed, get out of bed. Admonition is we're calling attention to what's important. It's when we're watching a movie and we say, you know what they just did there is not right. Right. Or we see a commercial and we say, hey, that beer commercial is not right. We're admonishing. True. Okay. So the key word is training, and Ephesians 6:4 says, so here's another one that's a little bit debated. Some people love this verse. Some people hate this verse. Give us Proverbs 22:6.
Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it.
That is such an interesting verse because most of the time people that struggle with this verse get hung up on the second half and miss the first half.
Yes.
So the focus can be on, oh my goodness, my kids are grown and not doing well, and I know I trained them, and it's not my fault, so this verse must not work. There's all kinds of weird oddities to this verse.
Yes. Uh-huh.
But it's just a simple verse. Coverdale, before he was a writer before the Authorized Version, so when he translated it into Old English, and he said, if thou teacheth a child what way he should go, he shall not leave it when he is older. So he kept the focus on the point of the verse. The point of the verse is not to get focused so much on what may happen when they're older, but the point of the verse is that training is the essential responsibility of the parent.
Right.
And if they do it, it will affect them. And it always does.
Right.
And my friend Robert Kurtz, he's a pastor friend of ours, and he, in one of the books I read that he had written, he quoted his dad, and his dad's quote was, "There are no delinquent children, only delinquent parents."
Ouch.
And that is kind of an ouch, and probably, obviously, a wise saying, not an across the board, always true.
Right.
But there's certainly a lot of truth to it. If a child is 9 years old and he's a brat, you would assume that he's not been trained.
Right.
It's interesting. If a child is 12 years old and he's a brat, you would assume he's not been trained.
Very true.
If he's 22-year-old and a brat, we tend to say, we've done all we could do, and they just made wrong choices. You got to think wisely about this verse and don't be offended by it. Remember that the point Solomon is making is, as parents, we have to train our children in the way they ought to go. Mm-hmm. And I always like to read this verse and stop and say, how are we doing? Are we training our two here at home in the way they ought to go?
Right.
And Beth and I work at this all the time.
We do.
We evaluate, examine, check it out, think about it.
Right. Even this morning on our walk, we were talking about how that we have not arrived in this at all, and we're still training, we're still learning.
I was actually a little disappointed as we're walking along. She was making the point that, we're not experts, and I was feeling pretty good about myself. I was like, well, I'll go back and change that in the notes.
It doesn't say anything about us being experts in the notes, at least now. But even just this morning, we were talking about how that every once in a while we get a little wake-up call as a parent.
Sure.
A child is sassy, or they talk back, or they disobey, and we think, oh, we have some training to do.
Yeah, and I think sometimes as a parent, and we do this, it's easy to think, oh, my word, and move on with our life. Or it's easy to think, well, I can't believe he said that. But every negative behavior is a wake-up call. Could say it's an invitation to train.
Yes.
It's a wake-up call that I got work to do. It's an invitation that says, oh, my son should not have talked like that to his mom, so I need to do some training.
Right.
And in our busy culture, this is killing us. Because some of you come home from work and you're so tired, and especially if you both are working, husbands and wives.
Yes.
And, you come home, you got, what many wives did in a full day of work many years ago has to be done now in an evening of work because of the work that's been done all day. And it's easy to overlook. It's easy to think, well, they shouldn't have said that, or it's easy to take it personally or to get frustrated, or I don't want to stop what I'm working on to go deal with this.
Just
or
snap at them instead of taking the time to train.
I don't want to turn the TV off to have to deal with this. And so it's all
Stop
a wake-up call.
scrolling Instagram. Yes.
And it's a huge wake-up call.
It is.
How about a few more verses here? Let's see. Proverbs 29:15.
This one's a good one. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself bringeth his mother to shame.
And here's the two sides of that verse. A parent can train, and the idea is if he does, the child receives wisdom. And as you know, wisdom is the ability to know what is right, combined with the character to do what is right. And so if we train, our child gets wisdom. The second half says a parent can fail to train. A child left to himself is a child that is not being trained. If a parent trains, the child gets wisdom, but if a parent fails to train, the child brings shame to his family. So there's four words in there. And the first half is the word rod. It's the word staff. It actually is the word that refers to the shepherd's implement as he was caring for his sheep. And some people in our culture are always like, oh my goodness, a rod, I can't believe you would spank a child. And we get so negative about the idea of the rod here. And sometimes it is used in a couple of verses with some very strong language.
Yes.
However, when you think of it in the sense of it's a shepherd implement, as the shepherd is protecting his sheep, he's keeping them together so that they're on the right paths. He's protecting them from harm. He may reach out with the rod and pull them back from danger.
True.
The rod is a very special word. and an important word. The word reproof is referring to our words. That's correction, punishment, chastisement, argument. It even can be the word chiding. But God tells us we use a rod, and somebody might say spanking. The second one then would be speaking.
Right.
In other words, there's correction and communication.
Yes.
So if we train, it's going to take correction and communicating. Our child will have wisdom. If we fail to train, it brings shame. He or she brings shame to the family. So the word a child left means to be sent away or dismissed or given over. To give over, to be dismissed. Sometimes we as parents, we dismiss.
Yes.
The issue. We send them away. We just don't want to deal with it. Just ignore
like
it.
What we were talking about earlier. I'm too tired. I just want to scroll. Social media. Don't bother me right now.
It's just so hard because and all of us are guilty of it. We're so busy.
Yes.
And then the word shame there is the word to pale. If our children are not well trained, the result is that we pale. The result causes us to pale. It literally will turn you white.
A sickness. Yeah.
And the shame is a disappointment. And so you moms and dads that are listening, that are in the midst of raising children, this is the most important word in raising children.
Right.
It's the word training.
If you think about this verse and you think as a parent, if you have a toddler right now, say, and you're at church and your toddler throws a little tantrum and they embarrass you, that it could be part of this verse. You could say, oh, I need some rod and reproof in my child's life,
sure, even applies
so
there,
that they do not bring me to shame. But just think how much more so if that child is not trained, and if that child is dismissed over and over and over again through his or her lifetime, then how much more that embarrassment will be as an adult child.
That's so true. And
it would bring nausea and a pale face.
Yeah, it would.
Yes.
And when you think of it in that term, because sometimes kids can embarrass you.
Yes, they can.
I can't believe. I remember years ago, one of ours, we were with a pastor, and he was fairly, I don't want to use the word harsh, but maybe strict is the word. How's a nice way to say this? You know what I'm talking about, don't you?
He was harsh.
Okay. He was a little harsh. And we had a little one, and the little one, it was Sunday afternoon. Beth and I, one of the things we struggled with in evangelism is the first impression of anybody would have on our children would usually be Sunday at lunch.
Yes, the pastor always met our children Sunday.
And Sunday at lunch is off sync. The kids, they're off. Sunday is the one day that our schedule is different. We're dressed up to go to church. The morning schedule is different.
Right.
The nap schedule is off. So that was always a challenging day. And I do remember that our son kept screaming at the table. He's just being silly, I think. I don't know that he was rebelling, but he was being loud.
Right.
And I kept, quietening him down. And I finally leaned over and said something to him in the sense of, if you don't quieten down, Daddy's going to take you out. And the pastor said, well, it's about time you said that. And it was a little awkward for both of us. So I don't know if that's the kind of shame that he means right here.
Well, it was embarrassing.
It was a little embarrassing, but, we were in the midst of it. It wasn't, he was 3.
Right.
If he'd have been a 13-year-old doing that, it would have been but he was a 3-year-old in training.
Right.
And so don't feel awkward if you're have a 3 or 4 or 5 or even an 8-year-old that's in training. But you got to get moving pretty fast because training, you don't have a long window.
When those embarrassing moments come, it's just another wake-up call as a parent. Oh, sure. Yes, we have some training to do.
Let's look at a couple more Proverbs here, and then
right.
we'll give some simple points and be done today. Proverbs 10:1.
The Proverbs of Solomon. A wise son maketh a glad father, but a foolish son is the heaviness of his mother.
There we go again. Back to the wisdom brings joy when our children get wisdom, and we already know that's connected to our training. Right. If we train, the child receives wisdom, and therefore we are glad. But if we don't train, the child remains foolish, and that's a heaviness.
It's a burden.
Yes. To the family.
Absolutely.
Proverbs 17:25.
A foolish son is a grief to his father, and bitterness to her that bare him.
Isn't that interesting? It keeps getting heavier as you read through Solomon. A foolish son is a grief and bitterness. And so one of the things our hope is that in this next few weeks of teaching, that all of us can learn more about training our children and perhaps bypass the grief, the bitterness, and the shame that results in failure.
Right.
Proverbs 22:15.
Foolishness is bound in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction shall drive it far from him.
That's an interesting verse. I was looking that up today, and I thought it is true that foolishness is normal to a child.
Absolutely.
It's just normal. And yet one of the things we have to do in the Bible, foolishness and wisdom are opposites.
Yes.
If our child doesn't have wisdom, then they're foolish. If they have wisdom, they are not foolish.
Right.
So a child that lacks wisdom has got to have something happen to it to change the foolishness. And here he says a rod of correction is essential because it is a way to drive the foolishness far from him. And one of the things that we've always wanted to do is to put foolishness as far away from our children's heart as possible.
Yes.
And that's going to take a ton of training.
It does. A
ton. So we have some thoughts and a few questions as we finish up our part one session today.
Okay.
And we're talking, remember, about the single most important word in raising children, and that word is
training.
So here's just some thoughts. Let's just work through them, and you start us off there, love.
Well, we all know that training is hard work.
Boy, that's the truth.
If you are the one that is training, if you are the one that's being trained, it's hard work.
Yeah, it is, and it always will be.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, if you're looking for, this will give us some really helpful answers to make things easy, well, you're not going to get that because God gives you a son or a daughter or sons and daughters or sons or daughters, however your family lays out. And no matter what child you have, it's just hard work to train. Yes. And part of the hard work is that it just happens at inconvenient times.
Yes.
It's a 24/7 responsibility.
It can be. Yes. Starts the moment your feet hit the floor.
And it actually starts the moment the baby comes into the world.
That's absolutely true.
It's hard work.
It is hard work.
And that leads me to a second statement in the notes here. Training takes a lot of time. and I don't know how to say that in a way that's positive except to remind us that it's going to take time.
Yes.
To teach our kids the Bible, it's going to take time.
Yes.
To teach our sons and daughters to obey.
It does take time.
To teach our kids to have respect. Even today, in our home, we're reminding again several times a repetition of something we're working on. Just shoring up an area. We say the yes sir, yes ma'am, or no sir, no ma'am, and we're shoring that up a little bit so that several times in the last few days, I've called on a child who didn't answer appropriately, so I call again.
Right.
It takes more time to just pause everything. No. What are we working on here?
Right.
It just takes a lot of time.
The thing is, and I hope that we'll communicate this over the next several sessions, though, is that when you put in the hard work and you put in the time, then after all of that, you do have rest.
That's very true.
It is. It is a season.
Yeah.
Your child training years is a season.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that because there are different levels of training. When you're training a toddler, if you win, it makes those elementary school years easier.
Oh, so much easier.
You're still training.
Yes.
But from a perspective of we've already won some very key areas.
Yes.
And if you win in those elementary years, junior high can be a training time on a different level.
Right.
And the teen years can be a training time that's really enjoyable.
Absolutely.
And you're coming alongside of, take them by the hand and leading them towards the future. And,
yes.
And so which leads me to that third one. And
okay. The third one is training is time well invested.
It's just an investment. An investment that's good is an investment that produces dividends. In other words, I put money into the account, and the account makes money from the money I put. That's well well invested.
It is.
And when we pour the time into our children, we talk to them, we correct them, we love them, we pray with them, we work on issues of their life. We pour the time into it. We drop everything to pour the time into it. We stop everything to talk. We're on purpose. We're focused. It's well invested.
It is. And I would even say it kind of sounds like everything's on the negative side as far as discipline, as far as training. Oh, my goodness, it takes so much time. It's so much hard work. But even in that time, not only is it well invested to make sure that they are well-trained and wise children, but it can be fun in the midst of the training.
Yeah.
You can have fun in the midst of the training.
And sometimes you just have to laugh.
Yes.
I remember a couple of times I said to one of my kids, I am laughing, but you're still in trouble.
Yes.
And that's so true.
Mm-hmm.
So let's close with a couple of questions here.
All right.
Our time's just about gone here.
Mm-hmm.
Just the main question maybe of the day is, are you training your children?
How would you know?
Some evaluations here. Are they obedient, happy, and thankful?
Oh.
If I can say to my son, all right, son, and he responds. If my child is regularly happy, they have a happy spirit, a happy heart,
Right.
a complaining, negative, down, frustrated,
Yes,
know,
a grumpy
blustery,
child.
grumpy child is not trained well.
No.
And they're
Maybe
thankful.
they just need a nap,
Yeah,
a
there's
snack and a
there's
nap if they're
practical
little.
side.
But if your teenager is unhappy and unthankful,
Or your 6-year-old.
yes, you do need some training.
Are they kind and respectful? And this is in the general. It doesn't mean there's not issues here, because we're always training.
Right.
But this is a good way to invest. Are you training your children? Maybe a better way to say that. Are you training them to be obedient, happy, and thankful?
Mm-hmm.
And are you seeing fruit of that? Are they kind and respectful? Are you training them to be? Are they hard workers? Are you training them to be? And one final question.
Hard workers. I'm sure we'll have a podcast about that.
We will, because that's an important one.
Yes,
and
it is.
We're living in a culture that has really missed that.
Yes.
Here's one final question, and we'll close with this. Where do you want your children to be when they are officially on their own? Maybe you've never thought about it.
Right.
It's easy to just, well, it's my son, it's my daughter.
Yeah, just live in the here and now.
But training, he often connects training in Proverbs, especially in Ephesians 6, that first verse, to future.
Yes.
So one of the things we have to do is focus, where do we want our sons and daughters to be when they are grown? And God gives us 1/4 of their life, all things being equal, or 1/3 of their life to help get them on the right track.
Right.
So that they'll be there. So what's the single most important word in raising children?
It is training.
It's the word training. Well, our time is gone, and I hope you'll join us next week, and we'll talk more. We'll look next week more about understanding the issue of training. How do you do it? What does it mean, and all that? So we'll go a little further in evaluating just understanding the issue. And so thank you for listening today.
Yes, thank you for joining us.
This is Keeping It Young, and we're very glad you joined us today. Have a great day.